If you had asked me that morning how I felt, I would have said like the luckiest woman alive. The sun streamed through the sheer curtains of my hotel suite, painting the walls with warm, golden light. My dress hung by the window, shimmering faintly as if it knew it was part of something important. My bridesmaids were scattered around the room. One was curling her hair, another was helping the makeup artist unpack, and the air smelled faintly of perfume and fresh roses. It was the kind of morning little girls dream about, the start of the story you expect to tell your children one day. And I wanted to savor every second. I sat at the vanity while the makeup artist worked, watching my reflection. My eyes were bright, my smile almost too big. I kept telling myself not to cry yet, save it for the vows. My heart thumped with a mix of nerves and joy. I had waited for this day for 2 years, since the moment Mark had slipped that ring onto my finger during a sunset walk on the beach. But even in the glow of the morning, little things nagged at me. Mark hadn't called or texted since last night. That wasn't unusual. He said he wanted us to keep the tradition of not seeing or talking to each other before the ceremony, but I thought he might send something sweet. A good luck text. A photo of his tie. Something. Instead, there was silence. Still, I pushed the thought away. He was probably just nervous. We both were. My maid of honor, Lucy, tapped me on the shoulder, interrupting my thoughts. "He's here," she whispered with a knowing grin. My pulse jumped. "Mark." She shook her head quickly. No, his mom. She's downstairs making sure the flowers are perfect. She said he's getting ready. Something in the way she said it made my stomach dip. What do you mean, getting ready? Lucy hesitated, then smiled a little too brightly. Nothing. Don't worry about it. I wanted to press her, but the hairstylist started pinning the veil, and there was no graceful way to interrogate my best friend with bobby pins sticking out of my head. An hour later, I was dressed. The lace bodice hugged my frame perfectly, the skirt falling in soft waves to the floor. The veil floated around me like a cloud. Everyone gasped when they saw me. Even I had to admit, it was perfect. We made our way to the small chapel where the ceremony would take place. Guests were already seated, their voices a low hum beneath the gentle music. I stayed in the side room, hidden from view, my bouquet trembling slightly in my hands. That's when Lucy leaned in again, this time looking pale. "Emma, I think you should know. I just saw Mark in the courtyard. He was talking to someone." My brows furrowed. "So, not just someone," she said, her voice dropping. "Her." I didn't need to ask who. Everyone knew about Vanessa, the stunning brunette who used to work with Mark, the one I'd always been just a little too aware of. He'd sworn they were only friends. My stomach twisted. What were they talking about? Lucy shook her head. I couldn't hear, but it looked heated. And she touched his arm. I could feel my heart start to hammer. My palms went slick. This was ridiculous, I told myself. Mark loved me. He asked me to marry him. Today was our day. Still, when the music swelled and it was time to walk down the aisle, my smile felt stiff. The doors opened, and I stepped into the warm light of the chapel. All eyes turned toward me. Guests stood, smiling, phones raised. At the end of the aisle, Mark waited. His expression was unreadable, not the wide grin I'd expected, but a tight, tense look. My father squeezed my arm and whispered, "You look beautiful, honey." I took a deep breath and kept walking, every step echoing in my ears. When I reached him, Mark took my hands. His were cold. The officiant began to speak, the words blurring around me as I tried to read his face. Was he nervous? Or was it something else? Then, halfway through the opening remarks, a voice rang out from the back of the chapel. "Stop!" Every head turned. A woman stood there, Vanessa, in a deep red dress that looked more suited for a cocktail party than a wedding. Her hair gleamed, her lipstick matched the dress, and her eyes were locked on Mark. The room went dead silent. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the stone floor. "You can't marry her," she said. "Not when you've been with me for months." Gasps erupted all around us. I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. Mark didn't say a word, and that silence told me everything. For a moment, I couldn't move. It felt like the walls of the chapel had closed in, trapping me in a scene I didn't remember agreeing to. The murmurs of the guests swelled into a low roar, and I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, searching my face for a reaction. Vanessa's heels clicked deliberately against the floor as she walked toward us, every step measured, every movement confident, like she belonged here. Her red dress was striking against the pale stone walls, and I hated myself for noticing how stunning she looked. Mark's hands slid from mine, leaving my fingers cold and exposed. The officiant cleared his throat. "Excuse me, miss, this is highly inappropriate." Vanessa didn't even glance at him. Her eyes stayed locked on Mark. "Tell her," she said. I looked at Mark. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't even denying it. His jaw was tight, his gaze fixed somewhere just past my shoulder as if he couldn't bear to meet my eyes. "Tell her what?" My voice cracked, thin and too loud in the silence. Vanessa smirked, but there was nothing playful in it. "That you've been in my bed for months. That you spent the night before your engagement with me." She tilted her head slightly, studying me as though I were an exhibit in a museum. "I figured you should know before you sign the papers." My breath caught in my throat. "She's lying," I said, but the words felt hollow the moment they left my lips. Mark finally looked at me. His lips parted, but instead of the firm denial I needed, all I got was, "I'm sorry, Emma." The room erupted, gasps, whispers, even a few sharp laughs. My vision blurred at the edges. My bouquet felt heavy in my hands, and I wasn't sure if I could keep holding it. "You're sorry." My voice was shaking now, my chest rising and falling too quickly. "That's all you have to say?" Mark stepped toward me, his hand half reaching for mine before he thought better of it. "I didn't plan for her to be here." Vanessa let out a short laugh. "No, but you planned to marry her while still keeping me on the side, didn't you?" She turned to the crowd, her voice loud and clear. "This man swore to me last week that he wasn't ready to settle down, that he didn't love her the way she thinks." I felt like the floor was tilting under me. My father stood from his seat, his voice cutting through the noise. "That's enough. This is my daughter's wedding, and you have no right." "She has every right," I interrupted, surprising myself. My voice was quieter, but it silenced the room. I looked at Mark, really looked at him, and realized something broke between us the moment he said, "I'm sorry," instead of, "It's not true." The officiant was frozen, his book still open in his hands. I could feel him waiting for me to say something that would let the ceremony continue, but I couldn't. Mark ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders slumping. "Emma!" I was confused. I thought I could commit, but what? My voice sharpened. "But you wanted to make sure you had a backup plan? You wanted to see if you could keep both of us." Vanessa stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume, rich and expensive, like everything about her. "Don't blame him entirely. He was honest with me. I knew about you. I just didn't think you'd actually go through with marrying him." I laughed then, a sharp, humorless sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. "Well, lucky you. You get him, and I get the public humiliation." Somewhere near the back, someone coughed. The sound snapped me out of my trance just enough to realize that my knees were starting to shake. I took a step back, away from both of them. Mark's voice followed me. "Emma, please, we can talk about this." "No," I said. "We can't. Not here." Not now. And then, as if on cue, a deep voice cut through the chaos from the far end of the chapel. Maybe what you need, it said, rich and steady, is someone who actually deserves to be standing next to you. Heads turned toward the source. There, in the aisle, stood a man I didn't recognize, tall, sharply dressed, and so composed that the noise in the room seemed to dim around him. His gaze was fixed on me, not with pity, but with something else entirely. And in that moment, I knew my day wasn't over. It had just taken a turn I never could have predicted. Every eye in the chapel turned toward the man standing at the far end of the aisle. He was tall, broad-shouldered but lean, with a kind of poise that made him seem like he belonged in control of any room he walked into. His tailored navy suit fit like it had been made for him, the crisp white shirt underneath flawless. His dark hair was combed back, not a strand out of place, and there was a confidence in his gaze that felt almost dangerous. He started walking toward me, slow but purposeful, as though time itself had decided to move at his pace. The murmurs in the room faded into silence. Even Vanessa's smirk faltered. I didn't recognize him. I was certain of that. But there was something in the way he looked at me, direct, unflinching, that made my knees lock in place. When he reached the front, he stopped beside me, his presence radiating heat. "You deserve better than this circus," he said, his voice low enough for me to hear but strong enough to carry to the rows behind us. Mark bristled. "Who the hell are you?" The man ignored him. He extended his hand to me. "Alexander Hayes," he said, "and I'm here to make sure you don't walk away from this day in shame." I blinked at him. I don't understand." "You don't have to," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "Not yet." Then louder to the crowd, "This wedding isn't over. The groom has changed, but the bride will still have her day." The air crackled with disbelief. Someone in the back laughed nervously, while others leaned forward in their seats. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father looked like he'd just swallowed a lemon. Mark stepped closer, his face flushed. "You can't just..." Alexander turned to him, his expression cold but controlled. "I can, and I will. You forfeited your right to stand here the moment you betrayed her." Vanessa scoffed, but I caught the flicker of unease in her eyes. I stared at Alexander, my heart pounding. "Why are you doing this?" His eyes softened, just slightly. "Because no one should have to remember their wedding day as the moment they were humiliated in front of everyone they love. You deserve to walk out of here with your head high, not your heart in pieces." It was absurd. I didn't know this man. And yet, standing there between him and Mark, I realized that I needed, someone to take control of this nightmare. My voice faltered, then steadied. "If I say yes, what happens?" Alexander's mouth curved into the faintest smile. "We finish what you started. We exchange vows. We give them something to talk about that isn't your ex-fiancé's affair." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the guests. My father stepped forward, his voice tight. "Emma, you can't possibly." "I can," I said, surprising even myself. "And I think I will." Mark's eyes went wide. "You're seriously going to marry a stranger?" I turned to him, my anger finally cutting through the fog. "You were a stranger the moment you lied to me." Alexander reached for my hand again, and this time I took it. His grip was warm, steady, anchoring me in a way I hadn't expected. The officiant looked between us, clearly torn between protocol and the bizarre reality unfolding. "Are you both certain?" "Yes," Alexander said without hesitation. I took a deep breath. "Yes." A ripple of shock passed through the room. I caught sight of Vanessa in the corner of my vision, her expression a perfect mix of outrage and disbelief. Mark's jaw tightened, but he didn't say another word. As Alexander and I turned to face the officiant, the whispers began again, swirling around us like smoke. I didn't know if this was a rescue or a reckless leap into something unknown, but as Alexander's thumb brushed over the back of my hand, I knew one thing for sure. This day would not end the way Mark had intended. And for the first time since Vanessa walked in, I felt like I could breathe again. The officiant cleared his throat.
"Very well, let us begin."
The guests leaned forward, hungry for whatever was about to happen. I glanced at Alexander, searching his face for a hint of motive, but all I found was that same steady confidence. I had no idea what I had just agreed to, and that uncertainty was both terrifying and electrifying. The officiant's voice faded into the background as I stood beside Alexander, my hand still in his. I could feel the weight of every single gaze in the room, pressing against my back like heat. My mind was racing, tripping over itself in an endless loop of questions. Who is he? Why is he doing this? What does he want from me? Alexander, on the other hand, looked perfectly composed. The man could have been standing at a board meeting instead of at the altar with a stranger. His thumb brushed over my knuckles again, subtle, steady, like he was grounding me on purpose. When the officiant paused, Alexander spoke in a tone that carried just enough for me to hear. "We can walk out right now if you want. Or we can finish this." I turned my head slightly, my voice low. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," he replied without missing a beat. "You've been humiliated.
This way, you leave as the woman who married the richest man in the room instead of the one left at the altar."
The words hit me like a slap. Why would you care how I leave? His eyes flickered with something, an emotion I couldn't place. Let's just say I've seen enough people like him get away with it. Not today. Mark's voice cut in from the side, sharp and incredulous. "You think she's going to just agree to this? You think she's that desperate?" Alexander didn't even glance at him. "I think she's smart enough to know she has a choice." A choice. That was what he was offering me, in the middle of the most public disaster of my life. I could walk away alone, shoulders bent under the weight of whispers, or I could let this stranger rewrite the ending. The officiant shifted uncomfortably.
"Miss, I need to know."
"Yes," I said, the word surprising even me.
"Let's finish it."
Gasps rippled through the pews. My father's hand gripped the edge of the front bench so tightly his knuckles turned white. My mother's eyes darted between me and Alexander like she was trying to figure out if I'd lost my mind. Alexander didn't give me time to second-guess myself. He turned fully to the officiant.
"Then let's proceed."
The ceremony restarted, but I barely heard the words. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. When it came time to exchange vows, Alexander spoke first. His voice was smooth, deliberate.
"I vow," he said, "to stand beside you in the face of gossip, to shield you from those who would see you broken, and to treat you with respect, whether this lasts a day or a lifetime."
It wasn't the language of romance, it was the language of a promise. Solid, binding, real. When it was my turn, I hesitated, the heat of 100 stares burning into my skin. "I vow to accept your hand today, in trust that whatever comes next, it will not begin with betrayal." The officiant nodded solemnly.
"By the power vested in me, you may kiss the bride."
I expected a quick, polite brush of lips. Instead, Alexander's hand slid to the small of my back, pulling me forward just enough that the room seemed to fade. His kiss was firm, deliberate, not overly long, but enough to make the murmurs swell again. When he pulled back, his expression was unreadable.
"Now," he murmured so only I could hear, "you walk out of here with your head up."
And so we did. He didn't let go of my hand as we stepped down the aisle together. Guests leaned toward one another, whispering furiously. I caught sight of Mark's face, pale, tight-lipped, with Vanessa's hand gripping his arm like a vice. Once we were outside, the cool air hit me, and I pulled in a shaky breath. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "I know," he replied. "But I wanted to." I searched his face for the catch, for the hint of calculation I was sure must be there. "Why?" He gave the faintest shrug. "Because sometimes the right thing is also the unexpected thing. Besides," his lips curved into a small, knowing smile, "you're going to need me." The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine, not because it felt like a threat, but because I had the sinking feeling he might be right. The moment we stepped out of the chapel doors, the world erupted in flashes. I hadn't realized just how many guests had pulled out their phones until I saw the line of glowing screens pointed directly at us. Alexander didn't flinch. If anything, he seemed to lean into it. His arm tightened slightly around mine as if guiding me down an invisible runway. "Smile," he murmured out of the corner of his mouth. I tried, but my lips barely curved. My brain was still caught in a loop, replaying the events from minutes earlier, the betrayal, the interruption, the impossible proposal. My life had spun completely off course in less than an hour, and I was walking beside a man I'd known for less than 10 minutes. We reached the steps leading down from the chapel, and that's when he did it. Alexander stopped, turned toward me, and cupped my cheek with his free hand. His palm was warm, his touch deliberate. Before I could ask what he was doing, he kissed me again. It was nothing like the first. This one was slower, deeper, almost intimate in a way that sent a ripple of heat through my chest. Gasps rose from the crowd behind us, followed by the rapid-fire click of phone cameras. I knew we were putting on a show, but something about the way his fingers rested just below my ear made it feel too real. When he finally pulled back, his lips brushed my ear as he whispered, "Now they'll forget the rest." The world around us snapped back into focus. People were still talking, loudly. Some clapped. Others muttered. I could almost feel the headlines writing themselves. The bride who married a stranger. We walked down the stone path toward the waiting cars. Mark stood off to the side with Vanessa, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. Vanessa's expression was unreadable, though her eyes tracked every movement Alexander made. "Do you enjoy humiliating people?" Mark called out, his voice cutting through the chatter. Alexander didn't even glance at him. "Only when they deserve it." Mark's face flushed red, but Vanessa tugged on his arm, steering him away. Inside the sleek black car that had been waiting for us, the noise from outside faded. For the first time all day, I felt like I could exhale. "That kiss," I said, turning toward him, "was completely unnecessary." He raised an eyebrow. "Was it?" "The look on your ex's face said otherwise." I folded my arms. "You're enjoying this way too much." He didn't deny it. "You should too. You're no longer the woman left at the altar. You're the woman who walked out with someone better." Better. The word lodged somewhere between my chest and throat. I wanted to tell him I didn't even know if that was true, but I stayed silent. The car pulled away, winding through the city streets until we stopped in front of a grand hotel. The facade gleamed in the afternoon light, polished glass reflecting the sky. A doorman opened the car door before the driver could even announce our arrival. "This is yours?" I asked. "One of them," Alexander said casually, stepping out first and offering me his hand. I hesitated before taking it. "You didn't mention you were. What did you say earlier?" "The richest man in the room." "I don't make a habit of advertising it," he replied, leading me inside. The lobby was all marble and gold accents, the kind of place that felt like it was designed to make you feel small. A few guests turned to stare as we passed, whispers following us like shadows. We took a private elevator to the top floor. When the doors opened, I stepped into a suite so large it felt like an apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, and the air smelled faintly of leather and something expensive I couldn't name. "You'll stay here tonight," Alexander said. It's the easiest way to avoid the chaos outside. I turned to face him.
And tomorrow?
His expression shifted, the sharp confidence softening just slightly. Tomorrow, you can decide if you want this to be the shortest marriage in history or something else entirely. My pulse quickened, though I couldn't tell if it was from the way he was looking at me or from the realization that he might mean it. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to the window, staring out at the endless stretch of city lights flickering to life as the sun dipped lower. Somewhere down there, people were already sharing photos, gossiping, spinning their own versions of the story. And somewhere in all that noise, I had to decide what part of it would be mine. Behind me, Alexander's voice was quiet but steady. Whatever choice you make, Emma, you won't be making it alone. I turned slowly, and for the first time since the kiss on the chapel steps, I felt something unfamiliar replacing the anger and humiliation. Hope. And maybe danger. Morning sunlight spilled into the suite, casting long stripes of gold across the polished wood floors. I woke slowly, my mind foggy from too little sleep and too many thoughts. The events of yesterday replayed in fragments. Vanessa's voice cutting through the chapel, Mark's frozen face, Alexander's steady hand pulling me out of chaos. I sat up, clutching the sheets around me. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the city far below. For a moment, I thought Alexander might have left, disappearing as mysteriously as he'd arrived. But then the door to the terrace slid open, and there he was. He stood in the morning light, a cup of coffee in one hand, his other resting casually in his pocket. The breeze toyed with his hair, and his shirt, open at the collar, shifted just enough to reveal a glimpse of tan skin. He looked more relaxed now, though no less in control.
"You're awake," he said, his voice low and calm.
"Good. We need to talk." I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. "About what? Which part of yesterday you want to explain first?" His mouth curved slightly, but it wasn't a smile. It was the expression of someone used to being questioned, and just as used to keeping his answers selective.
"About why I did what I did."
I crossed my arms. Yes, I'd like to know why a stranger would marry me in front of 200 people.
"Not a stranger," he corrected, setting his coffee down on the railing.
"An interested party." I frowned.
"Interested in what?"
"In making sure Mark Reynolds doesn't get away with ruining people." The sound of Mark's name made my stomach tighten.
"You know him." "I know of him," Alexander said, moving back into the room.
"We move in overlapping circles. I've seen him take advantage of people who trusted him. Women, mostly. But also business partners." "That doesn't explain why me," I said. "You could have just exposed him." He met my eyes then, his gaze unwavering. "I could have. But this wasn't just about him. It was about you. I saw you standing there, holding yourself together when most people would have broken. I thought you deserved to leave with your dignity intact. And maybe with something more." Something more. The words lingered in the air between us, heavy with implication. I turned away, pretending to study the city skyline. "So what now? Do we play happy newlyweds for the cameras?" "If you want out, we can annul this before the ink dries," he said. "But if you stay, there are benefits. I can protect you from whatever fallout Mark tries to create."
"And in return?" "In return what?"
A faint, almost wicked smile ghosted across his lips. "In return, you stand by me in public. There are events, deals, situations where having a wife at my side changes the way people listen.
It's mutually beneficial."
It sounded almost like a business transaction. And maybe it was. But beneath the polished delivery, I sensed there was something else, something he wasn't saying yet. I narrowed my eyes.
"And if I say no?"
He shrugged, as though the answer wouldn't bother him.
"Then you walk away.
Free."
"I won't stop you."
The quiet confidence in his tone told me he was certain I wouldn't. I hated that he might be right. Because as much as I wanted to believe I didn't need him, the truth was, I wasn't ready to face the world alone. Not with the headlines already swirling, not with Mark still out there, ready to twist the story. I studied him for a long moment. "You're not telling me everything." He didn't flinch. "No, I'm not. But I will, in time." And just like that, I realized this wasn't the end of the story that began in that chapel. It was the beginning of something even more complicated. Something I wasn't sure I could walk away from. By late afternoon, the whirlwind had barely slowed. My phone was a graveyard of missed calls, unread messages, and notifications I couldn't bring myself to open. Every headline seemed to carry some variation of the same story. Photos of me and Alexander leaving the chapel, our kiss splashed across the front page of gossip sites. The comments were a mix of shock, speculation, and, occasionally, brutal amusement. I sat at the marble kitchen counter in the suite, scrolling aimlessly, when Alexander walked in. He'd traded the open-collar shirt for a charcoal suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his expression unreadable. "You're coming with me tonight," he said, not as a question, but as a statement. "Coming where?" I set my phone down, wary. "There's a charity gala downtown," he replied. "It's been on my calendar for months. After today's development, it will be the first place people expect to see us together." My stomach tightened. "And what if I don't want to be paraded around like proof of your good deed?" He stopped across from me, placing his palms on the counter. "Emma, whether you like it or not, the story is already out there. You can either let them control it, or you can walk in on your own terms and make it yours." I hated that his logic made sense. Still, I crossed my arms. "And if I say something wrong? Or trip over my heels?" One corner of his mouth lifted. "Then you'll be the most talked about woman in the room twice in 1 week. Relax. I'll be beside you the entire time." Hours later, I stood in front of a full-length mirror in a dress Alexander had apparently arranged to be delivered in less than an hour, deep emerald silk that skimmed my body like it had been made for me. My hair was swept up, diamond drops catching the light at my ears. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. When I stepped into the living room, Alexander's gaze swept over me once, sharp and assessing. "Perfect," he said simply, offering his arm. The gala was held in one of the city's oldest ballrooms, the kind of place where the chandeliers looked like they'd been polished for centuries. The moment we stepped inside, conversations faltered, heads turned, and the air shifted. Alexander didn't slow his pace, guiding me through the crowd with the same quiet authority he'd shown in the chapel. We were greeted by donors, business magnates, and people whose names I'd only ever read in magazines. They shook my hand, asked polite questions, and tried, unsuccessfully, to hide their curiosity. Alexander fielded each interaction with ease, introducing me as his wife without a flicker of hesitation. Halfway through the evening, I excused myself to the powder room, grateful for a moment to breathe. But when I stepped back into the hallway, I froze. Mark was standing there. He wasn't supposed to be here, at least, not in my mind. Yet here he was, tuxedo perfect, glass of champagne in hand, leaning against the wall like he owned the place. "Quite a spectacle you've made of yourself," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. I squared my shoulders. "Better than the spectacle you made of me." He chuckled, low and humorless. "You think Hayes swooped in because he cares about you? Please. Men like him don't make moves without a reason. You're a pawn, Emma. And when he's done, you'll be left with nothing." I hated the flicker of doubt his words planted, but before I could respond, a familiar voice came from behind me. "Funny thing about pawns," Alexander said smoothly as he stepped into view, "is that they can still take down a king if you underestimate them." Mark's smirk faltered. Alexander didn't break his stride, slipping an arm around my waist and steering me back toward the ballroom. "Don't let him in your head," Alexander murmured, his grip firm. He's desperate. That makes him dangerous. The warning sat heavy in my mind as we rejoined the crowd. Because if Mark was here, watching us, it meant the game between us wasn't over. And I had the uneasy feeling it was about to get a lot more complicated. The gala's glittering ballroom might as well have been a chessboard. Chandeliers glittered overhead, casting golden light across the polished marble floor. Elegant laughter drifted through the air, but all I could hear was the echo of Mark's voice in my head. Pawn. Alexander's arm was still firm around my waist as we moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with people who clearly wanted more gossip than small talk. Every smile I gave felt like a mask, every polite laugh like a shield. We stopped near the far corner, where the music softened, and Alexander finally let me go. "You're quiet," he said, watching me closely. "I'm thinking," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "About what Mark said? I hated that he could read me so easily. About why he's here. About why you're here." Alexander tilted his head slightly, a movement that was both curious and cautious. "I already told you why I stepped in." "Not all of it," I said. "There's something else you're not telling me. I can feel it." Before he could answer, a tall woman in a sapphire gown appeared, her smile warm but her eyes sharp. "Alexander Hayes," she purred. "I didn't realize you'd finally decided to settle down." "Victoria," he greeted, his tone polite but cool. "This is my wife, Emma." Her gaze flicked over me, lingering just long enough to feel like a challenge. "Charming," she said, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I do hope you know what you're getting yourself into." The words were directed at him, but they landed squarely on me. After she drifted away, I turned to Alexander. "Friend of yours." "Business associate," he said simply, though something in his voice told me the story was longer and messier than that. The rest of the night passed in a blur of champagne glasses, shallow conversations, and camera flashes. By the time we left, my cheeks ached from smiling. The city was quiet as the car carried us back to the suite, the hum of the engine the only sound between us. "Mark's not going to stop," Alexander said finally, his voice low. "Men like him, when they lose control, they lash out. And now he has 2 targets instead of 1. I stared out the window. "You think he'll try to hurt me?" Alexander didn't answer right away. "I think he'll try to make you doubt yourself. Doubt me. And if he can't break us apart, he'll find another way." The words sent a chill through me. "And you're ready for that?" His gaze met mine in the dim light. "I've been ready for a long time." When we reached the suite, I kicked off my heels and sank onto the couch, my mind spinning. I didn't know what Mark's next move would be, but I knew this. I wasn't just a pawn anymore. Whether I liked it or not, I was in the game. And something told me the stakes were about to get much higher. I didn't sleep that night. The city outside the window was alive with 1,000 tiny lights, but inside the suite, shadows felt heavier than they should have. I kept replaying the events of the past few days. Mark's betrayal, Alexander's sudden appearance, the gala, and the way Victoria had looked at me like she knew something I didn't. By morning, I'd decided I couldn't live in this limbo anymore. If Alexander was hiding something, I needed to know what it was before I got pulled any deeper into whatever game we were playing. He was already awake when I stepped out of the bedroom, standing at the counter with a laptop open in front of him. He was scanning something. Documents, contracts, I couldn't tell, but the expression on his face was sharper than usual, focused to the point of tension. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Morning," I replied, moving toward the coffee maker. "You're working early." "Always," he said, still typing. I poured myself a cup, the silence stretching between us. Finally, I set it down and faced him. "Alexander, I need to know the truth." "All of it." His fingers paused over the keyboard. "The truth about what?" "You," I said, "and why you were at my wedding in the first place." Don't tell me it was just coincidence. He leaned back slightly, studying me with that unreadable gaze. It wasn't. Something in my chest tightened. So what was it? He closed the laptop slowly, as if deciding how much to reveal. I knew Mark would be there. And I knew he would eventually try to hurt someone important to him. I just didn't think it would happen in the middle of the ceremony. That doesn't explain why you were even watching him, I pressed. His jaw tensed. Because I had a deal with his father. A deal Mark broke. It cost people I care about a lot of money, and it nearly ruined someone else's life. Someone you know. I froze. Who? He hesitated just long enough for the answer to hit harder when it came. Your brother. The room tilted for a second. My brother? That's impossible. He never mentioned. Because he was ashamed, Alexander said quietly. Mark set him up to take the fall for a bad investment. Your brother covered the loss himself, but it put him under crushing debt. I tried to help him, but he refused to take it. When I realized you were marrying Mark, his voice trailed off, but his meaning was clear. You stepped in, I finished. To stop him from doing to you what he's done to others, Alexander said. And yes, maybe to get a little payback of my own. I gripped the counter, my mind a storm of anger, confusion, and something I didn't want to name. Why didn't you just tell me this from the start? Because I needed you to trust me first, he said simply. The truth settled between us like a third presence, unwanted but undeniable. And in that moment, I realized the stakes weren't just mine anymore. This was personal for both of us. Somewhere deep down, I knew the next move in this game wouldn't just be about revenge. It would be about survival. The rain had been falling all afternoon, a steady curtain against the suite's glass walls. Alexander stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, his reflection merging with the skyline. I sat on the couch, the echo of his revelation about my brother still rattling inside my head. We both knew the confrontation with Mark was inevitable now. The only question was whether we would face him together, or if he'd succeed in tearing us apart before we even began. Alexander turned, his voice even. Mark's hosting a private dinner tonight. He's invited a few influential people, and he made sure to extend the invitation to us. That's not an invitation, I said. It's bait. He nodded once. Exactly. Which is why we're going. I stared at him. You're asking me to walk into the lion's den. I'm asking you to walk in with me, he said, his gaze locking on mine. We end this tonight. The venue was one of those exclusive restaurants with no signage, just a black door guarded by a man who didn't need to check the guest list to know who belonged. Inside, the lighting was dim, the air thick with the scent of expensive wine and something richer, tension. Mark was already seated at the head of the long table when we arrived. His smile was a calculated mix of charm and mockery. Alexander. Emma. So glad you could make it. I took my seat beside Alexander, feeling the eyes of the other guests flick toward us. Mark opened the evening with light banter, but it didn't take long for his tone to sharpen. I have to say, he said, lifting his glass, you made quite the scene at the wedding. Very dramatic. Very opportunistic. Alexander's expression didn't change. Funny. That's the same word I've used to describe your entire career. The table went still. Mark leaned back, swirling his wine. You think you know me, Hayes, but you don't. And you, his gaze shifted to me. You're just a pretty distraction in a very old game. My pulse quickened, but I held his stare. If I'm a distraction, then you're worried about something. Otherwise, you wouldn't be trying so hard to get under my skin. Mark's jaw tightened. You think this little alliance will protect you? You'll see what happens when he gets bored. Alexander's hand found mine under the table,
a subtle squeeze of reassurance.
"You've been playing chess with the wrong people, Mark," he said calmly. "The difference between you and me is that I don't just plan for the next move. I plan for the end game." Then, with deliberate precision, Alexander slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, emails, contracts, bank records. I didn't need to read them to know they were damning. Mark's face drained of color.
"Where did you—"
"You've been sloppy," Alexander interrupted. "These are copies. The originals are already where they need to be. Tonight is your chance to step away quietly before they become public." Silence fell over the table. Mark's bravado cracked, his eyes flicking between us before settling on his plate. When the dinner ended, Alexander and I walked out into the cool night air. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened under the lights. "You planned that," I said quietly. "I planned all of it," he admitted. "But none of it would have worked if you hadn't stood your ground tonight." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that somewhere between the chapel and this moment, we'd stopped being strangers playing roles. We were partners. Whether that would lead to checkmate or our own collapse was a question for another day. The city had a strange calm the morning after. The streets shimmered from the night's rain, and the air carried that clean, damp scent that always follows a storm. From the balcony of Alexander's suite, I could see the sun pushing through the thinning clouds, casting golden streaks across the skyline. Mark hadn't been heard from since the dinner. The silence wasn't victory. It was a warning. Men like him didn't disappear. They regrouped. But for now, there was no fight to pick, no cameras to dodge, no whispers chasing my every step. Alexander stood beside me, coffee in hand, his usual armor of confidence still in place but softer somehow. We didn't speak for a long while, just watched the city breathe beneath us. When he finally did, his voice was low.
"You know this isn't over."
I nodded.
"I know."
He turned toward me then, and for the first time since the chaos began, I realized we weren't just holding our ground anymore. We were building it. Together. Somewhere in the distance, the church bells rang. Not for us, not this time, but the sound carried through the air like a reminder. A reminder that even the most broken moments can be the start of something new. Whether it would last, I didn't know. But as Alexander's hand found mine warm and certain, I decided that, for now, uncertainty was a risk I was willing to take.